They made him his own department for something useless and kept paying him department head salary there. People ask Reddit. Redditors who work for the government, what's the most ducked up thing you ever saw or heard? Canadian government here. My biggest issue is how the public service shuffles around duck-ups or promotes people failing upwards. That the managers' bonus packages were dependent of them reaching goals that didn't always match the needs of the governmental body I worked for. So come the end of the year, when performance is measured, management would ask us to drop everything we were doing, and do something else instead, so they could get their bonus. That meant we'd get further behind in our work, and that meant that the taxpayers, whose lives we were screwing with, would experience further delays in their cases getting settled. We have to spend all this money before the fiscal year ends or we won't get shit next cycle. Me, awesome, I have a list of gear and kits we are in dire need of and some stuff that would really make life easier around the shop. We got the boss a $10,000 paper shredder and his support staff some 80-inch TVs. Last year I had to spend $250,000 on a project that only needed $60,000 to meet scope, and if I just gave the difference back to the capital bucket, that would mean this year I'd definitely be approved for less money on a project that cost more. So suddenly every conference room went from standard chairs to ergonomic chairs. The project was for conference room modernization after all. Mine is more of drama. Lady I worked for wanted to hire her son, former failed golfer, so he could have a job. But we had a policy that says no nepotism, so she hires the son's girlfriend as a manager, then the girlfriend hires the son, and they all lived happily ever after on public tax dollars. Reply: oh yeah, I knew a bunch of cases of friends hiring each other's children in, and I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine situation. On paper you can't tell that anything happened, so it all skirts by. Where I live there is budgets in the school system for every facet. One of those is bus fuel. One year we had a lot of snow days. Way more than usual. But because there was a budget for fuel, and if you didn't use it they cut it back the following year, there were empty buses driving around all the time just to burn off fuel so they could keep the budget for next year. Not really ducked up, just making me angry. When you get high up you never really get let go, a new job just gets invented and you get promoted sideways. Reply: saw this. Guy was too incompetent to be allowed to be in charge of people after he ran his department straight into the ground, but he'd been there decades so he couldn't be fired. They made him his own tiny one-person department for something useless and unimportant that wasn't actually regulated, and kept paying him department head salary there. Another reply: seen this too. Lived in a city where this guy was hired as a second building inspector. Problem was, he kept failing the state test to qualify. He literally ended up maxing out his 3 chances to pass. So, they just kept him at his job. 4 years of an unqualified doofus inspecting buildings. The city finally got caught. So what did they do? They made a position for him, raised his salary. A long time ago I used to visit the Pentagon regularly. Their biggest joke I ever saw there was their laptop policy. You had to log any personal laptop into the building by serial number and get a card, which lets you take that original laptop back out, for security reasons, right? But if you had a government sticker laptop in your possession, you could just walk out with it, no paper or proof of ownership required. The best part? The reason for the rule was to prevent stealing government laptops. Still not sure how that worked. US Marine here. The government cares more about their weapons than their Marines. I was walking through a building leased by the IRS, the owner. He told me about an older single woman who died at her computer. She was not very sociable. Her death wasn't discovered until well into the next day. I worked for the TSA. In all seriousness, the potential threats that are out there are so hard to detect. But with the current training and technology we use is so inadequate it would be impossible to stop a sophisticated attack. The only way would be to ban all carry-on luggage emo. I didn't have an opinion before I started working for them, I just needed a job and wanted to keep racking up federal time for retirement. After working for them for 4 years it makes me sick how much money they waste and how much they violate privacy and personal freedom. Now I work for the VA. My job is to fire people. We had a recent case where a nurse took a patient to the bathroom because he didn't want to use the bedpan. He was on 8 liters of oxygen, and instead of getting a longer tube or portable oxygen bottle, she just unhooked him. She left him unattended for 20 minutes and he was dead when she came back. It's shocking how hard it is to fire people in the federal government. If you want to support our new channel, please hit the like and subscribe button. We would also love to read some feedback in the comments. Thank you very much. I worked with an older guy who always had Spycraft magazines. He'd talk about all the micro cameras and hidden mics you could get and how cheap they were. He had multiple rental properties, and he and our boss were besties. Well, every time I'd have a conversation in our office, where the boss didn't sit, the boss would later call and specifically address something that was said. Fast forward a year and we get a student intern. She was 18 and cute. The older guy always hit on her and made awkward comments, but she'd shrug it off. One day, he was being overly flirty and she mentioned her boyfriend. He was like, "Well, I'll get a pic of you in the shower and put it on a billboard, then everyone will see it." She was like, "You, stop it." It bugged me bad. Late the next afternoon I called and reported it to the EEO or someone. This was 20 years ago anonymously, but they needed my name to verify I was an actual employee, etc., etc. I said no way this can get back because they are friends, but reluctantly gave my name. The very next morning I came to work and immediately got a call from my boss. "Why in the world would you call in and report this? You should have come to me about this and let me handle it at my level." Luckily they called me and will let me handle it. His handling it meant I had to go and apologize to the old guy, the young girl, and my other coworker while my boss was there to ensure I did it and wouldn't do it again. I was devastated. I'll never report anything again. Ever. How nearly impossible it is to fire somebody. We had this guy in our area who was a fairly high-ranking I think GS13. He had been there years, and knew he was untouchable. He would come in late, leave early, spend 1.5 to 2 hours on lunch, blow off meetings, etc. Our new director decided he wanted to get rid of Mr. GS13. He followed procedure exactly. He gave verbal warnings, written warnings, counseling, etc. He documented every time the guy was late, left early, etc. Our director put all this stuff in a 3-ring binder and turned it over to HR. After reviewing the evidence, HR decided that it wasn't sufficient enough to fire someone of that rank or experience. And then there was the guy who stole a G-ride for a weekend and didn't get fired. Minor, but still messed up. In the IT department, all of the work computers had top-of-the-line CPUs and graphics cards so they could play games. The reason, if they didn't spend all of their budget this year, it would be reduced next year. So they spent it. Your tax dollars hard at work. Used to do contract work for a county. Had to fix a computer for an investigator that worked child abuse cases. I was warned about the material ahead of time. Software I had to work on was cataloging images. Let me tell you that I walked out of there in tears after seeing the absolutely monstrous shit people have done to kids. I fixed the problem and get the duck out of there as fast as I could. Props to those investigators, I couldn't do that kind of work. Worked for state government. Bureaucracy exists to prevent accountability and progress. They have mechanisms built in and protocols in almost every department to preemptively kill any perceived counter-movement in the crib. That and systematic denial is a legitimate problem-solving strategy in government leadership. If they don't know about the problem, they don't have to deal with it, so the underlying message that ends up being communicated is shut the duck up about the problems, even if they're big ones. Thank you for listening to another B-Town Reddit Stories episode. Hit the subscribe button and check out our channel for more stories. Let us know your opinion about this topic in the comments.